Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who's seeing us on this webinar today. I welcome you on this webinar, which is hosted by SAP LeanIX, and we're thrilled to have you join us for this webinar, which promises to be an insightful session. Before we dive into the core of the presentation, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce our esteemed speaker. Joining us today is Kisanga Devendra, who's a Senior Solutions Advisor for APAC, Asia Pacific region at SAP LeanIX. Born and raised in the beautiful country of Sri Lanka, Kisanga brings a wealth of experience to the table. Having dedicated most of his impressive 14-year tech career to solution advisory, he began his journey as a solution consultant in the infrastructure domain, working with large IT distributor before seemingly seamlessly transitioning into software consulting and enablement. His diverse background provides him with a unique and comprehensive perspective of technological landscape. Beyond his professional prowess, Kisanga is also an avid sportsman. I'm sure he loves cricket as well. In his pastime, he enjoys hitting both tennis and cricket balls, a testament to his dynamic and energetic spirit. Without further ado, please join me in giving a warm virtual welcome to Kisanga Devendra. Over to you, Kisanga.
Thanks, Imran. Hopefully you can hear me now.
That's perfect.
Yeah, thank you for that very eloquent introduction. Good afternoon, good evening to all of you that have dialed in. As Imran pointed out, my name is Kisanga, and I'm one of the solution advisors for SAP LeanIX, specifically looking after the LeanIX enterprise architecture solution across Asia Pacific. And my goal today is to take you through the journey of a little bit about enterprise architecture and also looking at LeanIX as a tool and how it can provide benefits to the enterprise as far as maintaining and managing your enterprise architecture, but also using it for your transformation journeys with whatever types of transformation that you might be going through today or you're hoping to go in the very near future. So without further ado, I will go ahead and start presenting. What I would like to do is, hopefully you can all see my screen. And I'm just going to start with setting a bit of a scene here before I actually dive into the tool itself, a little bit about LeanIX and where it's come from as well. So this is all about navigating your transformations and achieving your continuous improvement with LeanIX. Now, as part of SAP's strategy in the last 4 to 5 years, they've made some key decisions around tools that can help the customers around the world, whether you're an SAP customer or a non-SAP customer, in staying innovative and also transforming your landscapes in order to modernize your landscape and stay future-proof. Now, as part of the transformation, you go through this process of running through what's known as your transformation infinity loop, which is what this is. And as part of this process, you have your discovery, analyze, design, implement, and operate phases. Now, with any transformation, there are key elements that play a crucial part in that. People, processes, applications, and data are those 4 elements. SAP made a conscious decision a few years back to acquire a bunch of solutions that had capable tools that are quadrant leaders in their various domains in order to fit those areas of your transformation. So specifically looking at starting with the process piece, Signavio was the original or the first acquisition that SAP made, followed by LeanIX, and most recently WalkMe. And the whole purpose of these acquisitions was to help customers improve their speed to transformation. So essentially providing capabilities that are available out of the box, which were potentially traditionally done using various other resources, manpower, which took a lot of time. Now you've got these tools that come together in order to provide you with less effort and also time to value. So if we look at all these different areas, for example, in the discovery phase, we've seen with customers using these tools, they've been able to save up to 60% of effort on the discovery phase, up to 30% effort on the analyze phase, 8 to 15% on the implementation phase, and so on. So there's many examples from customers out there who have used these tools, potentially all three of them, in some cases maybe just one or two, in order to improve their transformation time to go live. Now, where does LeanIX fit in to all of this as far as the SAP ecosystem is concerned? So as part of the business transformation tools, Signavio, LeanIX, and WalkMe now form its own line of business known as the Business Transformation Management Suite. So this is essentially where it's sitting across the whole SAP Business Suite, which is what this image is showing. The purpose today is to really understand more about how LeanIX as a tool is providing a capability to the enterprise architecture within an organization. So what do we mean by enterprise architecture? Now, I am sure there are people in the audience today who come from an enterprise architecture background. For those who are not familiar with enterprise architecture, and also for those who are working in organizations where enterprise architecture is still very much in its infancy, this is a pretty good definition of what enterprise architecture means. So it's essentially a well-defined practice for conducting enterprise analysis, design, planning, and implementation, as I showed you in the previous Infinity Loop, essentially using a comprehensive approach at all times for the successful development, execution of strategy. So enterprise architecture applies architecture principles and practices to guide organizations through the business, information process, and technology changes that are happening as you execute your strategies. So this is in essence what enterprise architecture entails, all the different components that form the big picture of enterprise architecture. Now, when we think about what a transformation is, we have 4 stages that essentially define what a transformation is, from creating what your strategy is and then executing it. So the first phase, which is probably the most important phase, when we think about going back to that Infinity Loop that I showed you earlier, the discovery and the analyze phase. So essentially this is looking at where things are today within your organization. And then we've broken it down into the process, applications, people, and the data piece. Now, each of the tools that I mentioned earlier, Signavio, LeanIX, WalkMe, play a crucial part in this phase, as well as all of the other 3 subsequent phases as well. But we're specifically focusing on LeanIX here, enterprise architecture. It's really understanding what your current capability mapping and the maturity of your capabilities are. So essentially looking at what that current as-is architecture. And then how do we want the future to be within the organization as we go through various transformations? We want to define what the target architecture is going to look like, and then start designing our roadmap towards that. Now, once we've done the designing, then you go through the process of creating what that landscape actually looks like to support that future operating model. And that includes architecture transformation progress tracking, and then also implementing your new applications, because you're going through a process of modernizing your landscape. So when we talk about doing a capability assessment today to understand what your maturity gap is, and then looking at what that to-be capability maturity should be like, based on that, you can start to look at deploying new applications, deploying AI, deploying new modules, features that allow your users within those capabilities that are using those technologies to really get the best out of those systems in order to help them do their job to their best capabilities. And then essentially, once you've done that, rolling that out to the organization and ensuring that you have continuous improvement across your architecture as you keep having more and more transformations. Any innovative organization will continuously keep transforming. It's not just a project or an initiative. A transformation is really future-proofing, as I mentioned earlier, future-proofing the organization to make sure that you stay competitive. So today's goal is to look at what LeanIX is, or where LeanIX plays a part in that. So where does it all start from? So the challenge we see in the industry, what LeanIX is here to solve is essentially, let's say I have a business, or I'm part of a business, and I have my CXOs sitting at the penthouse. My CXOs have a specific strategy or a goal or a metric that they're trying to hit. In this case, let's say that we have a metric coming from our CXO's office to say that we want to improve or increase our direct to consumer sales by 20%. In order to get there, we need everyone else in the business to be aligned. Now, the challenge is that for the most part, most enterprises, IT will have certain flexibility on how they manage their infrastructure and what capabilities and technologies they release into the business. Now, the challenge being that for the most part, these things are not aligned. And this is usually the problem that we've discovered across businesses when we talk to them as well, is when your CXO goals are, or the rest of the business is not aligned with your CXO goals, and that leads to these challenges such as a lack of transparency, a lack of governance on the IT side of things, and then also a lack of trust in the business or within the business as well. There's a great quote here from Gregor Hub, who's he's a bit of a cult hero in the enterprise architecture world. He has done many keynotes for many organizations, including SAP, where he talks about that the leadership is under this false impression that transformations are proceeding quite smoothly, but there's a lot more going on within the business where things tend to get delayed and there isn't any sort of communication across the organization or transparency to really understand how is the strategy aligned to the IT. How do we solve this? So in order to solve this, the most important thing that we should be looking at is bringing all of your architecture layers together. And that's really what an enterprise architecture tool like LeanIX is trying to do. Now, I'll talk a bit about democratizing enterprise architecture because that's a very unique thing for LeanIX. But what we mean by consolidating your architecture layers is essentially bringing everything from your strategy layer at the very top, which is from your CXOs, the penthouse, as they call it, and aligning everything that's happening at that layer all the way down to your engine room, which is your IT department, the people in the business that provide technologies to help us to do our jobs essentially. And it's about bringing all of these layers together. And this is what enterprise architecture tools like LeanIX is trying to provide. These are some of the key solutions that we tend to come across in the industry that people use to individually manage those parts of the business. So if I start at the very bottom here, when we think about the tech architecture layer, the hardware or the software architecture layer, most businesses that we talk to will be using CMDB tools or ITSM tools like ServiceNow or BMC Remedy or any of those other counterparts that are in that remit. Then at the very top, if I go to the strategy layer, you have tools such as Jira, Confluence, and all these other strategic project management solutions that businesses are using to define their various milestones, do their capacity planning, and track how a specific transformation or a project is progressing. Between the business, or within the layers of the business, you have all these other tools that you're seeing here, and these are just some logos that essentially we tend to come across when talking to customers. This is where most people in the business will spend a lot of their time. Signavio being one great example. It is one of the best process mining tools out there, which businesses will use to analyze their current business process, and then also design what the future business process should look like. And then going through the other parts of the layers of the architecture as well, all these various other tools that you might find. And these are, again, as I mentioned, just some tools that we come across. There are many other tools that customers use. Now, the most important thing here to understand is that LeanIX isn't trying to replace any of these tools. Those tools you see on the right-hand side are what's known as operational, functional tools. So that's where most people will spend day to day. If I'm a business analyst or a process architect, I'll spend a lot of my time in Signavio. If I'm a project manager, I'll spend a lot of my time in Jira. If I'm a solution architect or an IT architect, I'll be spending a lot of my time in tools like ServiceNow, BMC Remedy. If I'm part of our development team and we're writing a lot of new code, we're developing new custom applications for the business, I'll probably have a lot of my code and all of the microservices architecture captured in a GitHub repository. Okay. The great thing is that LeanIX can tap into all of these tools. These are all some of the native out-of-the-box integrations that LeanIX has got. So you can leverage the information in these tools if you're already using them from day one. The moment you implement LeanIX, you can actually get the context from those software tools and then put that information into LeanIX. And then when we talk about democratizing enterprise architecture, this is actually quite unique to LeanIX, is that LeanIX is commercialized on a application basis, which means it's unlimited users. So you can let anyone in the business, everyone from a project manager to a solution architect, to a business analyst, to an application owner, a capability owner, or anyone else in the business basically access the information and consume it to fulfill any of their use cases. So this is one of the key, that's what LeanIX is trying to do, is bring all of those layers together from your enterprise architecture, everything from the strategy all the way down to your tech. These tools that you're seeing here on the right-hand side are essentially your sort of day-to-day functional operational tools. If I start at the very top here, most customers we talk to will use a tool like Jira or some other project management solution to do their strategy and capacity planning, define their milestones and track their projects. They might be using Signavio for their process mining to look at their current process and get a definition of what that future process should look like. And then at the very bottom, you have tools like ServiceNow, which are predominantly used by businesses to manage their IT assets, ITSM processes, as well as their configuration management database. So essentially your IT Bible. Now, by no means is LeanIX here to replace any of these tools. Essentially, it's there to get context from these tools from day one. The moment you implement LeanIX, you can start tapping into any of these tools, including GitHub, for example. GitHub is a great example of where most enterprises we speak to, especially in the subcontinent, is where you're using your developers in-house to create these custom applications that are very unique to the business. Now, most of those custom code or the microservices architecture is sitting in a tool like GitHub. LeanIX can tap into that code and actually basically create the artifact against the microservice, which aligns with the application, which supports the capability, so that you can see how your landscape is changing or it's being impacted as a result of that strategy or the transformation that is taking place in the business. Okay, so that's essentially what this slide is showing here, is that it's by no means there to replace any of these tools. It's there to leverage the context from those day-to-day tools so that LeanIX becomes your 40,000-foot view into the business. So anyone at the CXO's level or anyone from the IT department can actually view this information. And this is what we mean by democratizing enterprise architecture. It's actually a tool that LeanIX has coined, which differentiates LeanIX from all of your other enterprise architecture tools out there, or even the concept of it. Because traditionally, enterprise architecture has always been this speciality in a business where a bunch of people maintain these artifacts. It's quite protected. You put some guardrails and not many people have access to that information. LeanIX is basically democratizing it. So anyone from your project managers to solution architects to application owners to capability owners to business analysts, anyone can basically access the information in LeanIX, use it for any of their use cases. Okay, so that's probably the most important thing about LeanIX. Unlike most other solutions out there, it's unlimited users. You can basically provide access to anyone within the business when you start using it. Now, as a tool for the last 4 years now, both Signavio and LeanIX have been in the Gartner Magic Quadrant, but specifically LeanIX as an enterprise architecture tool, it has been the leader for now 4 years running. So I just wanted to point that out as well. Now, let's move on to understanding a bit more about the framework. Now, for anyone in the room that's from an enterprise architecture background, you might be very familiar with this diagram. For those of you who aren't, this is essentially TOGAF, the TOGAF framework, or the enterprise architecture framework, which I found out recently it's actually not the oldest. Zuckerman is actually the oldest enterprise architecture framework, which is around 40 years old. TOGAF is now around about 30 years old. So this is probably the most common framework that most enterprise architects use today. So how does this work? So this framework is really there for you to basically use as a way to capture the various parts of your enterprise architecture. So starting from your left-hand side here, when we think about how we can break TOGAF down, everything from your architecture vision to the business architecture, information systems, your technologies, and then going into the right-hand columns, which is more around the insights and the decisions that you need on how you define your architecture to get to your future state. So the opportunities and the solutions that you have, your migration plans, your implementation governance, and then your change management. Okay, so this is how things were done traditionally. 6, 7 out of 10 businesses we speak to will be very familiar with TOGAF. They might be using TOGAF with spreadsheets, Visio, and SharePoint, etc. So there isn't a tool in place, but they have the framework, which is a great start. I think that's the most important thing, is to have the framework before you look at having the tool. Now, how does TOGAF align with the LeanIX framework, or the meta model of LeanIX? So, and we'll go into that in a bit more detail now. So essentially what's happening is you take your, the columns on the left-hand side, which is your architecture vision, your business architecture, information systems, and the tech architecture. That directly aligns with the 4 layers of the LeanIX meta model, which is strategy, business, application, and technology. And when you basically bring that together, what you're looking at here is the enterprise architecture framework defined by LeanIX. So, and this is a great example as well. So if we start at the strategy layer, how does this meta model work? So I have an objective here, the same example that I showed you on the previous slide. I have my CXO defining a metric, which is we want to increase our sales by 20%. In order to get there, collectively as a business, we have decided that we're going to implement a new customer-facing app in the business. So that is my initiative, or that is potentially my transformation. Now, that initiative will have an impact on the rest of my architecture, including it's going to impact my CRM capability. It's going to impact my order to cash process. It's going to have an impact on various parts of my organization. If you're a conglomerate, it's potentially going to impact certain brands, certain regions. If you're a more corporate organization, it might impact certain lines of business. It might impact certain customer groups, etc. So you can create the meta model in any way, shape, or form you want to. And then going further down into the next layer, which is the application layer, it's going to have an impact on certain applications. Those applications are connected by interfaces to other applications. And then going further down one step to the technology, the technical architecture, now you're looking at the infrastructure layer. How is all of this information or these applications being supported? And it's usually by hardware, software, cloud services, platforms, etc. So that's essentially how the LeanIX meta model works. Now, this meta model has been active for about 8 years. It's now in its 4th iteration. It's continuously being improved. most customers, including Gartner now, are talking about how the LeanIX meta model is probably the most intuitive, agile framework because it really caters to most of your newer sort of AI use cases, as opposed to some of the traditional frameworks like TOGAF and Zuckerman, which are a bit more rigid, and it's a bit harder to sort of mold them to your organization. So for that reason now, many customers are following this methodology as part of their enterprise architecture framework. Now, if you take one of those old notations, you can easily frameworks or notations, you can actually sort of blend it into the LeanIX meta model as well, which is why it's really easy if you were to implement LeanIX today, and if you are coming from a TOGAF background, or if you are coming from an Archimet sort of background, or UML, any of those notations that you might be using, it's really easy to implement those frameworks and notations into the LeanIX meta model. Now, when we talk about how this works, we talk about quick time to value, is because the relationship's already predefined. This is that same graphic that I showed you, but the arrows are basically showing me how everything is connected. You can see the objectives are connected to the initiatives. The initiatives improve these capabilities. There's an association to the processes or the context. The capabilities are being supported by applications. There are interfaces between applications, and there's IT components at the bottom that's supporting all of this. Okay. Now, customers, you can start anywhere. It doesn't have to be a big bang approach as well. And that's really important with the enterprise architecture. It should never be a big bang approach. You should basically start with any phase that is comfortable for the organization, depending on which artifacts you have. And we'll talk about that in a bit more detail as well. Now, we want to make sure that the framework is not rigid. So for that reason, there's a lot of flexibility on how you can start to expand the meta model. These are just some predefined subtypes that are available out of the box that you can use to expand the meta model. But customers sort of do their own thing. When I go into the product, this is what the framework will look like. It's really easy when you log into the system to click in various parts of the framework to dive into the various artifacts. This is what the standard framework looks like. So it's basically got the strategy layer, the business layer, the application layer, and the infrastructure technology layer. But our customers will try and get as creative as they want to. So these are some examples from real life customer workspaces of LeanIX that, the way they've gone and enhanced the meta model. And you'd be happy to know that we've got our own example here as well. So that is actually the one on the right-hand side is actually the SAP meta model for our own production LeanIX instance. And you can see how it's been expanded to fit the organization's requirements based on how they wish to manage or govern the enterprise architecture. So where do we start? Okay, so now when we think about bringing the tool in, so we've got the framework, so now let's bring the tool, LeanIX. So most customers we talk to, this is the world that they're living in. They have spreadsheets with all of these artifacts, hundreds, if not thousands of lines of applications, data objects, IT components, process information, etc., capabilities, L1, L2, L3, depending on the hierarchies and the maturity of the capabilities, all defined usually in spreadsheets, potentially on Visio diagrams, or various other tools that you might be using to create your architecture diagrams, and also some tools in-house, including ServiceNow, for example. ServiceNow is where potentially your IT component information is residing. So we can basically take all of those spreadsheets, take all of your diagrams, connect to your systems, and start populating LeanIX immediately. And once you start doing that, then you can basically essentially start, let's say you have your list of applications defined, your capabilities are defined, your organization structure has been defined. So those are the easy ones. And this is what we talk about, a phased approach, or the quick wins that you can get from LeanIX, as opposed to going with a big bang approach. take what you already have, put it into LeanIX, and immediately you will start to see what that current landscape looks like. So if you recall that first slide that I showed you, the 4 stages of transformation, the most important one, in my opinion, is looking at what your current state looks like. As the famous saying goes, you've got to walk before you can run. So if I start with what I've got, then I can start to understand how everything is connected, at least from an application perspective. And then there are other customers that have the IT layer really well defined, whether that's, again, on spreadsheets, SharePoint, Visio diagrams, or potentially in a database or a CMDB like ServiceNow. If you have that information in those systems, we can tap into that and then create the relationships for you to start looking at how are my applications supporting capabilities, how is my IT supporting those applications as well. And then also looking at things like lifecycle information from a risk and obsolescence perspective. I can get that information into LeanIX and then really paint a picture to my CIO to say, these are all the technologies that are going end of life. It's going to impact these applications. It's going to impact our CRM capability. As a result of that, we should start looking at creating some initiatives to potentially start phasing those technologies and phasing in some new technologies as well. LeanIX has also got value accelerators built into it as well. So because LeanIX is now part of SAP, SAP is bringing 45 plus years of industry expertise, having worked with both the public and the private sector for many, many decades. We have those expertise built into the system now in the shape of reference catalogs. So these reference catalogs allow you as the customer, when you start using LeanIX, to look at everything from business capability models for your various industries, for your various domains. You also have reference catalogs to look at applications for all of your out-of-the-box, off-the-shelf applications, where you can use the reference catalog to define the naming conventions, descriptions, and standardize your information, as well as for IT components as well. IT components that are available out in the market that you can use to track things like your end-of-life information, and also to standardize the naming and the description details as well. So that way you govern the information that's sitting in LeanIX, you standardize it so that everyone understands what it is, as opposed to people creating artifacts using their own experiences or putting a lot of guesswork, copy pasting from the vendor's website where mistakes can be made, etc. So to avoid all of that, we have these value accelerators available out of the box. Similarly, from a process perspective as well, you have the processes or the predefined processes in LeanIX. You can actually get those in Signavio as well from a process perspective. So these are some of the value accelerators that are available from LeanIX from day one when you start using the system. When you take all of those things in, so you've taken all of your artifacts, you've taken the capabilities of LeanIX, this is what we're trying to get to, or this is what you are trying to get to. So this is an example of a non-SAP modeling best practice. I'm starting in the middle with the application. In this case, LeanIX is just a standard application. It has certain IT components that it's being supported by. Those IT components is provided by a certain vendor. It's got a specific category. There's interfaces into other applications. In this case, there's an interface into Signavio for my process manager or process modeling. It's supporting these business capabilities in my organization. It's been used by these parts of the business, and it's also having an impact on these processes. And it's also part of this specific initiative right now. So this is the world that we are trying to get our customers to when they start looking and understanding how everything is interconnected. Now, this is for non-SAP, and there's also best practices available for your SAP modeling as well. So these are, again, capabilities that are available out of the box to help you model your landscape, whether you have an SAP, a non-SAP, or a mixture of both. So I'm going to pause there. I'm just going to check with Imran to see if there are any questions before I go into the tool.
There are a few questions that have come in already. Uh, there are two questions specifically. The first one is beyond identifying optimization opportunities and improving data quality, what are some of less obvious or emerging practical applications of AI within SAP LeanIX that enterprise architects should be aware? So basically, the idea is, I think, both the questions are towards AI. How can AI technology be rightly used? I believe we can go into this question towards when we're talking about the product.
Yeah.
I have another question that's come across through one of my chats. I had an opportunity about 15 years ago with a group of companies, a family office in Middle East, in Dubai, where that time there was no transformation. That time it was restructuring. So there were multiple groups, there were multiple businesses, real estate, construction, hospitality, and lending business. So four businesses parallelly running, and four business owners having their own processes, own separate tools that they were using. There was no software at that point of time. So the question is, a company like this who is migrated from that on paperwork business to an ERP system and now trying to do a larger transformation for growth, what can be done now at this stage where they have, this is the progress. So at this stage, they are into a position where they're expanding in different geographies, they're investing heavily, and they want to streamline before they go big.
Okay, thanks, Emra. So a couple of questions there. So there were a few around AI. We'll go into that in more detail as we go through the tool. But the second question, which was more around, I suppose, best practices and guidance, I guess, when implementing a solution such as this to accommodate growth, expansion, and also a form of transformation, I guess. So that, again, both great questions. The second one is actually quite relevant because that's usually the type of question that we get asked, especially in markets where enterprise architecture still is in its very sort of infancy, and there aren't any sort of tools being used for enterprise architecture. If there are enterprise architects, or a framework has been implemented in a business, it's usually done quite manually. So, and I think this is another eye-opening aspect as well with a tool like LeanIX, which has the ability to basically plug into the systems that you already have and then pull data from those systems and then basically showcase to the stakeholders and the people responsible for strategy where the quick wins are potentially. And I'll give you a great example of that. So rationalization, it's probably the most important and the most basic use case for enterprise architecture and LeanIX. Most customers that implement LeanIX has now got over 1,600 global customers. The first thing that they start looking at with LeanIX coming on board is looking at that current landscape and quickly evaluating which applications and technologies they can immediately get rid of. A, to sort of move away from having archaic legacy tools and applications. B, to obviously come up with some cost savings so that they can put that forward to the stakeholders to get their buy-in in order to start modernizing the landscape. To sort of deploy things like AI across the landscape. And AI in itself has a major play with LeanIX as well. And we'll talk a bit more about that. So to me, hopefully I'm answering that question in one way or another here, is using a tool like LeanIX. I always tell folks as well, this is not an operational tool. It's more a transformational strategic tool. The operational tools is where you spend a lot of your time. It's where all of the data is sitting. LeanIX is taking all that data and painting a picture to the business to showcase where you should start prioritizing your initiatives as part of, whether it's a cloud transformation, a modernization transformation, a RISE S4 transformation, any of these major transformations, which usually tend to take months, if not sometimes years, can be sped up with a tool like LeanIX. Also, being complemented by tools like Signavio and WalkMe. So hopefully I've answered that question to a certain degree, but let's go into the tool as well, because I would like to basically start by showcasing what this looks like. So let's say we've just been through an implementation of LeanIX, and when we take all of those artifacts, they basically come into the LeanIX inventory. Okay, so the inventory is essentially where all of those artifacts are going to be sitting once it's been imported. So you see over here on the left-hand side, I have my trusty meta model, which I showed you on the slide, which customers will go ahead and configure. They might expand on the meta model, or they might just stick to the standard meta model or the framework that's provided out of the box. So when I talk about democratizing enterprise architecture, anyone in the business can have access to LeanIX. Obviously, there's a group of people that will be responsible for maintaining the access levels. So it's all role-based access, just as you do with any SaaS platform out there. Now, if I'm coming from the strategy layer, I'm a project manager working in the PMO office, I might only require access to looking at our initiatives. Sorry, it timed me out. Let me just log back into that. I might only be interested in looking at initiatives, programs, projects within the business. Okay, so I can ensure that anyone from that office that logs in will only be able to see our initiatives, programs, and projects that we're running. And you see over here, we've got all of the various projects that we're running for this particular business. Okay, now if I go to the very bottom of my meta model, I start at the IT layer. There's my infrastructure layer. Now this taxonomy, you can see, can be expanded even further. This taxonomy is potentially what's sitting in your CMDB. It's potentially what you have already with your ITSM organization. That's defined by the ITSM organization. And you can just take that taxonomy and put it into LeanIX and take the context from those systems as well. If I now go to the business layer, when we talk about what is business context, so now I'm breaking it down into things like value streams, customer journeys, processes, products, services. These are all things that can be implemented within the LeanIX framework. So if I'm a business architect, a business analyst or a process architect, I might only be interested in looking at the processes. So if I'm the owner of this tool, I can make sure those individuals, when they log in, they can only see these artifacts, because this is where they will spend a lot of their time. And if I go to this credit management process, you will see that there's all of the context to do with that process. It's got a great description there using artificial intelligence. We've got generative AI built into the tool. You don't have to do any guesswork. You can use the tool to create the context for you, so you maintain your artifacts in a more standardized way. And this is all about data quality, and also making sure that you are capturing everything that you need to in order to conform to your organization's requirements. Each organization will use LeanIX differently. There might be certain attributes that are important to your organization, which might not be so important to another organization. So you can define in the fact sheet which attributes are the most mandatory ones, which are the ones that need to be maintained accurately. And for each of these artifacts, there will be a responsible person. So in this case, Alex is my process owner. He is responsible for making sure that this information on this process, which is a key process for our business, is kept up to date. There are features available in the system for auditing as well, because this is an auditing tool. Most of our largest enterprises use LeanIX as an auditing tool. They actually get the auditors to log in to LeanIX because they trust the information in here, because the responsibility is across the business. It's not just for the enterprise architects. It's not just for the IT department to manage this tool. This is a business tool, unlike your traditional enterprise architecture tools that you might find in the market. Where are we getting all this information for this process? Again, when I spoke about this earlier in one of my slides, Signavio is the tool or the solution of choice when it comes to process management. So this is my credit management process that's defined in Signavio. So if you were using Signavio, your business analysts and your process architects will basically be sitting in Signavio day in, day out. It's where they manage things like their cycle times. If they want to simulate what that future process state is going to look like, if you want to improve your cycle time, you can see within Signavio that it's going to have an impact on a few applications. So from Signavio, you can come straight into LeanIX, and then within LeanIX, you can now start to see how it's painting a picture of the enterprise architecture. So credit management in this case is supporting or is being used by these 4 applications. And as part of that, SAP FICO, which is my main finance application, is involved in that process. So if we are making a change to that process, I know it's going to have an impact on this process, on this application. That application is supporting all these areas of my meta model, of my enterprise architecture, including these capabilities, including these other processes, including these IT components. Okay, so if we were to make a change, for example, to this database, I know that it's supporting these 15 other applications. So when I spoke about how LeanIX has a role to play in the various parts of the business, the various personas, the various use cases, you can use LeanIX to really start drilling into the rabbit hole to look at how this is all interconnected. Now, where's this information coming from and who's responsible for it? Like I mentioned earlier, each of these fact sheets will have someone in the business that's responsible for maintaining it. IT people will be responsible for maintaining your IT artifacts. Capability owners will be responsible for maintaining the capabilities. Application owners will be responsible for maintaining applications. Your project managers will be responsible for the various initiatives and projects that you're running within the organization. And this information might be coming from your project management software like Jira. IT information will be coming from your ITSM or CMDB system. Just like I mentioned, the processes are coming from Signavio, etc. So that's how LeanIX is sort of painting that bigger picture to understand how your enterprise architecture is being supported. And then I can start to go even further. If we get into the application layer, we spoke a bit about custom applications, microservices that you have custom code where you're developing all these applications to which are unique to the enterprise. We can tap into those GitHub repositories and basically get the microservices and then see how those are related to a specific application in the business as well. So that's kind of how you can really start to sort of break the meta model even further. And LeanIX has been used by many financial institutions, government organizations. So these are highly regulated organizations. So security controls and protocols are another area of concern for a lot of businesses. Businesses use LeanIX, the meta model. They basically customize the meta model to define their security controls in there as well. And by having those governance controls in there, for example, in this case, I've got the example of using a NIST framework. That particular framework is supporting certain applications within the business. It's important when we run an audit to make sure that those applications are adhering to the controls defined by this particular security framework. So I can use the meta model in that way to define those other areas of the frame or of my architecture, which complements my overall enterprise architecture. Okay. So that's how you get data into LeanIX and then start looking at how you maintain and manage the data within the inventory. So that's potentially taking it from Excel, SharePoints, and other systems. We can also take your artifacts or your architecture diagrams from your Visio tools, regardless of what notation you're using, UML, Archimet, or any other sort of notation that you might have. You can export those from those tools dump them into the LeanIX diagram capability. So there's a diagram canvas built into LeanIX, so you can stop using all your Visios and your other sort of drawing tools. Instead, get everyone to start using LeanIX, so you can really start to collaborate, because it is a collaboration tool as much as it's an enterprise architecture tool. And all of these artifacts you can see are linked back into my inventory. There's my AC management fact sheet. I can basically start looking at all the other artifacts, including initiatives, capabilities, and then also the infrastructure, etc. So whether you're looking at it more from a diagram perspective or you're looking at it from a list perspective, you get the information into the inventory, and then once you've got the information in there, then you start now unlocking all of the use cases. So first use case is understanding what your current state looks like. We call that the application portfolio management. You basically go through the discover and the analyze phase of my transformation that I showed you earlier. We get all of this data from the various tools. We start looking at how our capabilities are mapped in the landscape. I'm just gonna go back into that dashboard. First place you will start is doing a capability assessment to really look at, which are your commodities, your differentiators, your innovations. When we talk about innovative capabilities, these are the ones that differentiate you from your competitors. So in this case, finance for this business is actually a unique capability, because there's potentially things that they're doing which are quite different to their competitors. And these are the capabilities that you want to protect and keep innovating in. So the first thing you do with LeanIX, you can use the built-in surveys to ask the business what the capability maturity looks like. The current maturity is a level 2, we're trying to get to a level 3. And then you go through and look at, okay, now let's look at the application landscape. What are all the applications, which are the mission critical, business critical applications that are supporting the capabilities? And then you go down to the various capability areas, looking at, if we think about rationalization, this is actually one of the main reports that customers use immediately to start looking at, why is HR in our business using all these applications? Maybe these applications are not governed properly. They're not approved by IT. And this is how you can start to look at rationalizing your landscape. How are my applications connected to one another? In which direction is the data flowing? Which are the provider applications? Which are the consuming applications? Data objects, as you recall in the meta model as well, you can basically capture the data objects that are being consumed and transferred between various applications. You can actually use LeanIX to classify your data as well, to see which applications have sensitive data objects, as well as part of your transformations if you need to start prioritizing that. And then looking at doing a portfolio assessment. It's like, if this is my landscape today, we know that these applications on the top right, we can immediately either do a lift and shift or move to the cloud. We're quite happy with it. The business are saying that they're functionally and technically fit, so it's all good. But the ones on the bottom left, these are the ones that maybe we can start, eliminating, because they're not technically and functionally fit. And then once you do that, you go through the next use case, which is to do with rationalizing your landscape. You've done the assessments, and then you use things like the Gartner time framework, for example, which is probably the most popular framework to decide which applications you're going to tolerate, invest in, migrate, and eliminate. And then once you've done that, you see the color coding here that shows me which applications we're going to be eliminating. We've made that decision, and I can present this back to my CIO, to my transformation office, saying, we are going to eliminate all of these applications because the business has spoken that these applications are functionally and technically not fit for the business. Maybe as part of our transformation, whether it's a cloud migration or a RISE transformation, we're going to save, this amount of money by doing that. And then we start looking at creating your roadmap. And as part of that, you can also look at cost analysis as well. Okay, you can capture with LeanIX your TCO information about the various applications. I can see if we move these applications, we're going to save around $300,000. Again, provide that information back to my stakeholders. And then once you've done the rationalization, then you start now looking at your future state. How do we create our roadmap? What are the milestones that we need to configure in order to phase all of these applications out and then also phase the other ones in? How's my landscape changing? What interfaces are being added? Which are the ones that we should prioritize? Which initiatives provide more business value than others? Which initiatives are the ones that are a bit more risky to the business? And then you can start to look at how that landscape is changing over time, and including things like how my interfaces are changing over time, and also do things like scenario modeling. I think I mentioned that the third step of your transformation is to sort of create the various scenarios and then eventually decide which one you want to go with and use LeanIX as a means to deploy that and then track the progress of it. So those are the main use cases. There are others in the mergers and acquisition space. LeanIX plays a big part. There are some large organizations that have multiple brands that have gone through acquisitions and mergers that use LeanIX to assess their landscape and then sort of bring things together. Air India is probably a great example, especially after their Vistara merger as well. Their landscape changed a lot, so they're using LeanIX. And then also AI. AI governance is a big piece. Another question came up earlier about AI. LeanIX is used a lot for understanding AI governance across the business to see which applications are AI ready, fit for purpose, and then based on that, look at either sort of, are we ready to deploy AI for those applications, or should we hold back? Are we going to develop our own large language models, or should we buy something off the shelf? For you to even do cost benefit exercises, you can use LeanIX for that, and then sort of create the roadmap to deploy those things as well. So those are just some of the main use cases that I wanted to highlight. I'm just conscious of time. I know we've just gone up to the hour, so I'm going to stop the presentation and the demonstration there. Imran, I'll pass it back to you to just see if there are any other questions that have come up.
Thank you so much, Kisanga. I think that was a great presentation and great understanding. I'm sure everyone who's seeing this now has better idea of what to do in their specific roles. With AI being talked about so much, the technology is growing every day. How can EAs or enterprise architects stay ahead of the curve and continuously adapt their strategies to leverage AI advancements within the context of course, SAP LeanIX for sustained business transformation, not just one-off?
I think, so besides just the capabilities that are built into LeanIX as far as AI is concerned, so there's AI capabilities such as generative AI that's built into LeanIX that allows you to sort of look at the context within your workspace and enhance it. We can also make, or LeanIX can also make recommendations on areas of your landscape that you can rationalize, you could optimize. So those are out-of-the-box capabilities. But for me, I think one of the most important ones is around governance. AI, it's all well and good to deploy AI, but if you are not really sort of having any governance on it, it's probably not going to go too well. So for the most part, LeanIX is used heavily by organizations to govern how they define their AI strategy. LeanIX has basically got out-of-the-box capabilities such as attributes that are predefined, which you can use using the surveys as well to understand if certain applications have the potential for AI, if certain applications have any other risks involved with AI, and then based on that, decide where you want to prioritize. So for me, capabilities out of the box for LeanIX, yes, that's available, but the governance piece is probably the most important one when using LeanIX as an enterprise architecture tool, aligning it with your architecture practices as well. One thing I forgot to mention is that LeanIX has now got architecture decisions built into it, so you can actually create your architecture decisions in here as well. So you don't have to do this outside anymore. People used to do this stuff on SharePoint, Confluence, emails, going back and forwards. You can actually now define your decision based on your principles. So for AI, for example, you might have a set list of criteria that the application should conform to before you go ahead and approve or accept that change, and you'll be able to see which applications and fact sheets are being impacted as a result of that.
One quick question on that. Now, we have the framework. We know AI governance is important, and LeanIX as a tool can give a bird's eye view of the overall business and give them the understanding of where they need to tweak it, how it needs to work, and then the decision comes back to the humans who's using it. Is there something in the future, in a plan, where the AI can actually suggest next steps, not just the tech, or not give suggestions, objectives, or maybe create new projects based on the information or data provided by the business?
So there's a lot going on as far as AI is concerned for LeanIX. The roadmap for LeanIX is public. You can just Google LeanIX roadmap, and you can see in there some of the great features and capabilities that we've got coming up. We are in the process of implementing the SAP Joule AI capability, which is going to allow you to have conversational style interactions with LeanIX. And that's not just for looking for artifacts, but also to get suggestions back from LeanIX as well. So those are some of the capabilities that's going to be available. So when I spoke about making recommendations, Joule will be able to eventually, provide you context around improvements that you can make, or next steps, for example, or add-on things that you can do as far as how you can improve your architecture practice.
That will be awesome to see it in practice. Great work. It was a great presentation, great understanding, and even I was enlightened with so much that you shared with us. I would like to conclude by saying, if you have any other questions, please feel free to connect with Kisanga directly on LinkedIn, and you can definitely send him an email or get in touch with him through the form that we had shared earlier. And this video will be available for next 1 year for anyone else who would want to see it on our on-demand page. And over there we'll mention Kisanga's details where you can connect with him directly. For now, thank you so much, Kisanga, for your time and for this presentation, for this excellent presentation. It was an honor to have you with us and share your expertise with a wider audience. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Imran, and I hope it was really valuable to everyone else as well. Thanks.